Hello and welcome to Csit 301 Mobile Application Development. My name is Paul Nitaki Ama and I'll be the instructor for today. Welcome to session 3. In this session, we are looking at the overview of Worklight Studio. After completion of this session, every student should now be able to install Worklight Studio as an Eclipse plugin. You should also be able to set up an Android or iOS development environment. You should be able to explain the Worklight development framework. You should also be able to describe the Worklight Studio mobile development tools. Then finally, you should be able to describe the steps that are involved in creating, building, and testing an application in Worklight Studio. The session outlines are as follows. We would first look at IBM Worklight Studio installation and configuration. Then we would look at the overview of a mobile development process. We would create a project and write some code. Then we will look at building applications. Then we'll look at how to preview and test your application, and finally publish your application. The reading materials have been uploaded onto the Sakai platform. Please do well to have a look at them. Now, the IBM Worklight Studio, like we saw in the previous session, is that interface which we would be using to write and maintain our code or our application. Now, this studio is going to be a plug-in into Eclipse. Currently, IBM is now customizing an Eclipse version that comes with the mobile studio already installed. Now, Worklight Studio allows you to easily create and modify applications. It also allows you to deploy applications to the embedded Worklight server. We talked about the Worklight server in the previous session. It also helps you to preview and manage applications by using the Worklight console. You're also able to create and modify Worklight adapters. Then you can deploy Worklight adapters to the embedded Worklight server. You can also test Worklight adapter procedures. To install the Worklight Studio into your Eclipse, you would need the plugin. Now, the plugin works starting from the Eclipse version 4.2.2, which is Juno. Now, the Worklight Studio runs on operating systems that the Eclipse supports. It runs on a 32-bit and a 64-bit edition. You can have Eclipse on Microsoft, Windows 7, 8, and later. You can also have it on the Mac OS 10.7 and above. Then you can also have it on the various flavors of the Linux system. The IBM Worklight Studio installation requires that you have a JDK or a JRE installed. The IBM runtime environment uses the Java Technology Edition 6, 7, and greater. Oracle Java SDK, JRE, and the JDK are the softwares you would need installed. Now, Worklight Studio version 6.1, which is what we'll be using in this course, supports the following mobile software development toolkits. iOS, the Xcode version 4.5 and above. Then for Android, it supports the Android Development Toolkit, the latest version. Now, we'll talk about the installation methods. Worklight Studio can be installed in one of two ways, depending on the target operating system and the product packaging. The first one is through the Eclipse update site. So this is supported on all operating systems. It's supported on all IBM Worklight product editions, and it uses the Eclipse P2 archive location for source of plugin. The second approach is using the IBM Installation Manager. Now, this is supported on non-Mac operating systems only, not applicable to IBM Worklight Developer Edition, and it uses an IBM Installation Manager repository for source of plugin. To go through the installation using the Eclipse update site, you will need to open or launch your Eclipse. Then you would need to click on Help. Then you navigate to Install New Software. Click Add to add a location. Then when you click on Add, you now navigate to the location of the Worklight Studio plugin in source. Now you can see a screenshot of how it's done. Then you click on Next or OK. Now this is going to open another interface where you are going to see the IBM Worklight Studio development tools. When you expand that, you find that it has IBM Dojo Mobile Tools, IBM jQuery Mobile Tools, IBM Worklight Studio. Now you click on Next. Now this is going to continue, take some time, and then install the Worklight Studio into your Eclipse. After the installation is successful, you are going to see a blue icon which represents the Worklight. You can see that blue icon highlighted in the screenshot. Now, to build for Android, you would need the Android development environment setup. So we are going to walk through how to set up the Android development toolkit. Now, the first thing you want to do is install the Android Software Development Kit, which is the SDK. This requires you to install the Android SDK core tools and also install the Android SDK platform and platform tools. Then you will continue to install the Android development tool, which is the ADT, as a plugin in Eclipse. Then finally, you will create an Android virtual device. So these are the 3 steps that we are going to follow. Now, to install the Android SDK core tools, you would need to download the particular version for your system. If it's a Linux system, you have to download that for the Linux system. If it's the Windows system, you need to download that one for your Windows system. There are also, for different types of systems, there's the 32-bit and then the 64-bit. So you follow based on your system to download that specific one. Now, the Android SDK core tools are required to download the rest of the SDK components. Now, you download the installer or compressed file package from the Android SDK download site. Now, after installing that one, when you launch that, it's going to give you an interface where you can now install the platform tools and then the SDK platforms. So here is a screenshot of that interface, and then you can proceed to now check on the platform tools and then choose the SDK platform of your choice. Installing the ADT plugin for Eclipse requires you to select Help, install new software just as we did, and then you launch the plugin installation wizard. You click on Add, and then you enter a name. Here you want to enter a name like maybe ADT so that you can easily recognize what it is. Then you would input a location. The location is displayed on the screen. We have HTTPS with a link that navigates to the Android site given as the Eclipse plugin. Now, this is a screenshot of how that will look like. After you've installed, you should see Android SDK icons and Android Virtual Device Manager icons show up on the Window tab. To create an Android virtual device, you would need to select the window and then you navigate to AVD Manager. Now that is going to give you an interface where you can now use to create a virtual device. You click on New, you select which platform or target that you want to create a virtual device for. You fill in the necessary configurations and then you click on Create AVD. Now, when that is created, you would find that it also shows up in the Android Virtual Devices tab, and then you can select on that and then click Start. Clicking start is going to begin launching the AVD, and finally when it's launched, you should see an interface, which is the Android interface for that particular platform that you created. You can see a snapshot of that in the slide. So that will be it for installing if you wanted to develop for an Android device. In a case where you want to develop for an iOS device, then you would need the iOS development environment. Now the process here, you can download and install Xcode as follows. First, you will need to register as an Apple developer. Then you would proceed to download and install the latest Xcode IDE from the Mac App Store. Now, this is a screenshot of the process you would need to go through to register as an Apple developer. You will need to fill the details and then gain access to download. Now, after you are finished with the registration, you proceed to download and install Xcode from the Mac App Store. Now, Xcode is a complete, full-featured IDE which allows you to develop, compile, and build native iOS applications. Now, you are able to use an iPhone or iPad simulator using the Xcode. Now, it also helps you to manage your testing devices. Now, after you are done with that, we will now want to launch our Worklight Studio and look at how it integrates with Xcode. Now, Worklight Studio automatically generates an Xcode project for your application, and you can open it directly in Xcode to compile and run on an iOS simulator. We'll now want to talk about the overview of mobile development steps. Now, for every Worklight mobile application development, it follows through a life cycle. Now, we are going to look at what this life cycle is. Currently, we have a diagram showing the processes and different stages that we need to go through to develop an application. The first part of it is creating a project. To create a project using Worklight, you can use the project creation wizard. Now, you need to click on the Worklight project icon, which is going to give you a list of different items on the menu. And the top one would be Worklight projects. Since we want to create a project, we want to click on the Worklight project. Now, that is going to give us another interface, which is the wizard. Then we would need to enter the name of our project. So you enter the name of your project, and then you choose a project template. Here we have several templates. We have a hybrid application. We have an inner application we talked about in the previous slide. We have native API. We have shared templates. We have shell components. So here we would want to choose a hybrid application. Then we'll click Next. Then it would also require us to select a hybrid application UI framework. So here we would proceed to select one. If you have a framework where you want to use, then this is where you specify what that framework would be. Here you can choose the Dojo, the Sencha Touch, or the jQuery Mobile. Now, after that, the Worklight project is created, and then you begin to see a structure of the application or the project in your Package Explorer. Now, this structure is divided into 3 categories, which we'll talk about. Now, the first point of it is the references that are shown. Now, these are required for application development and deployment. We have the WorkSphere application server. We have the WL server library. We have the server folder. And then we have the JRE system library. Now, all of these are the references. The second part of it is the project application and adapters. Here, this is where your application and the code you write will reside. Then finally, we have the server customization components. Here, all customizations to the server end is done in this part of the application. Now, the Worklight project has a structure which we saw a screenshot of in the previous slide. Now, the default environment is called common, and it contains all the resources that are shared between environments. We have the index.html file, which is the main file, and that's where our application is going to begin. Most of our code is going to be written in that file. Then we have the CSS folder, which is going to contain all CSS and stylings for our application. By default, there's the main.css, which is the main application CSS file. We also have the images folder, where we are going to keep all images that we would use for our application. Then we have the JS folder, which is the JavaScript folder that contains all our JavaScript files. And here we have by default the main.js, which is the main JavaScript file for that application. We have the messages.js, which is a JSON object to hold all application messages. And then we have the auth.js, which is the application's custom authentication mechanism implementation. Then we have the legal folder, which holds all legal related documents. Also, you would find that there's the application descriptor.xml. This file contains application metadata. Then finally, we have the build settings.xml. Now, this file contains the configuration options for reduction and concatenation. There are additional folders. Now, these are the environments. If you added a new environment to your application, that is, if you added an environment, let's say Android or iOS for your application, then different folders will be created based on that. Now, following the Worklight project structure, we also have the server folder. Here we have the conf folder, which contains the worklight.properties. This defines the server configuration properties. We also have the authentication config.xml, which defines authentication realms. Then we have the lib or library folder, which holds jar files that can be deployed to the Worklight server. Finally, we have a Java folder that holds Java classes that are compiled and deployed to a Worklight server. Finally, we have the bin folder. The bin folder contains project artifacts that can be deployed to a Worklight server. We have the WLAPP files, which are the application bundles. We have the .adapter files, which are the adapter files. And then we have the .jar and .war files, which are server customization files that contain the Worklight properties, authentication.xml, authentication config.xml, and the custom Java code. The Worklight Application Descriptor is an XML file that stores the metadata for a Worklight application. Now, here is a screenshot of some of the contents of this file. You can see here that you can input the author name. You can also give the email of the author. You can tell where the main file, the name of the main file where execution is going to begin. You can also put that in here. And then a link to the thumbnail image that should be used for the application. All of these are in the Worklight Application Descriptor.xml file. Now, the environment specific information is inserted automatically as new environments are added to a project. Now, this is also part of the Worklight XML file, application descriptor file that we are talking about. Now, here gives us a snapshot of two environments that have been added. We have the iPhone and then we have the Android environment.